Hello, I'm Gwen Ifill. Welcome to the Washington Week Webcast Extra. I'm joined around the table by Hannah Alam of McClatchy Newspapers, Dan Balz of the Washington Post, Coral Davenport of the New York Times, and Pete Williams of NBC News. Time for a flashback. Nearly 2 years ago, when the deaths of 4 Americans in Benghazi, Libya, turned into a flashpoint for U.S. foreign policy and U.S. domestic politics. Well, it's back. The Speaker of the House has impaneled a new committee to reinvestigate Benghazi, and the disagreements are sharply partisan.
Who's gone to jail for violating the law? When is the administration going to tell the American people the truth? They've not told them the truth about Benghazi. They've not told the truth about the IRS. They've not told the truth about Fast and Furious.
It's a kangaroo court, has been identified as such. Don't dignify what they are doing. The fact is this is a stunt. This is a political stunt.
A search for truth or a stunt? Dan?
You expect me to answer that?
Not really, but I expect you to outline exactly the opposite corners of the fight.
In the Republican Party, and not just in a corner of the Republican Party, but probably much more broadly than that, there is a belief that this administration has not told the truth about Benghazi and that there are still things to be learned about Benghazi. And this was exacerbated by the release of an email a couple of weeks ago or 10 days ago that had never been released, that was from Ben Rhodes from the National Security Council staff, talking about talking points. And the administration tried to describe it in one way, and most everybody else read it in a different way. And it re-inflamed the whole issue of Benghazi. We've been through, as former Speaker Pelosi said, many hearings, many investigations, and any number of reports about this. There have been some clear conclusions about lapses, but for the Republicans, it is still an energizing issue, and it is an issue that they feel that they still want to get mileage out of. Democrats see this as totally political. The administration sees it as totally political. Democrats aren't sure yet whether they will cooperate with the select committee that the Speaker has appointed at this point. But we're in for who knows how many more months of hearings, subpoenas, investigations, who they will call. Some people think that this is an effort by the Republicans to energize the base for the November elections, that in one way or another the Affordable Care Act has begun to lose a little of its potency, so this is another way to do it. But Republicans say that there are other things that they're seeking in this, and we'll see. I mean, it's a very tricky issue for the Republicans, because if the hearings look like a spectacle or a circus, they could suffer politically. On the other hand, if the administration handles this badly, or there's further information that comes out, don't know what that would be at this point, then the Republicans will be able to say this was a legitimate reason to do this.
You know, one of the questions about this has always been what the administration's role, what sticks in folks' craw is whether the administration was truthful, whether they were spinning, or whether they were lying about the circumstances of the attack. But Hannah, what was Congress's role then and now in all of this, and what was known and what was not known?
Well, certainly to hear about this flurry of hearings and everything, it's just very different from the situation even 16 months ago, when, as a colleague of mine noted in a story we have up today, there were no questions on the Hill about how is Libya going, even after Congress signed on to the U.S. involvement in the NATO intervention that would go on to remove Gaddafi. There was no talk on the Hill. There were no hearings being held about the deteriorating security conditions in Libya. Were they able to stand up a police force? Were they able to disarm any of these militias? Who are these militias? Because now we know of at least one militia's role in the night of this incident. But suddenly there was a big interest after Benghazi, and now we've had so many hearings, so many document dumps, so many public appearances on this issue. But for all the criticism that the administration took its eye off Libya, I think there's plenty of blame to go around in that respect.
Okay, well, thank you both on that topic. I want to move on now to the story we started the regular broadcast with, which was about the climate change report. You wrote another interesting story, Coral, about just focusing in on one particular place, in this case, the state of Florida. When you talk about the impact that in specific regions were highlighted in this report, tell us about Florida.
I went to Miami specifically because I had been, and I went to Miami before this report came out, but I'd read the draft report and I had been talking to some of the authors who said again and again, Miami is one of the places where we are really seeing the impact, the unquestionable impact of climate change here and now on the ground. And Miami is vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, both because climate change is expected to bring stronger hurricanes, higher storm surges, and it's right in a hurricane path. But also, this is really interesting. South Florida has a really unique geology. It's built on top of this porous limestone, and so what's happening now as glaciers are melting and the sea levels are rising, and the sea levels have measurably risen over the last 50 years. The salt water is encroaching in and soaking and saturating in that porous limestone foundation. And what is happening in the city of Miami is the salt water is coming in and threatening freshwater supply. This is a huge problem. The city of Miami is already having to spend several $100 million to rebuild and prepare. They do expect to lose a lot of freshwater supply, freshwater wells, as that salt water comes in and infects it. And it's also doing something as the tide comes in, the water comes in, seeps up through the sewers. And while I was in Miami, I was on a regular street in South Beach, Alton Road, very busy commercial street. It's got a Whole Foods and a Walgreens. And every day in high tide, on a sunny day, this is not caused by rain or storms, you see the salt seawater come up out of the gutters, fill the streets, fill up the whole street, come up to the levels of cars. I went into a laundromat, and the owner of the store kind of looked out the windows. He said, "Yep, here it is again." And he had drains on the floor of his store, and he said, sometimes it comes up through the drains of my store. And he said, I've owned this store for 8 years. I know people who've been in this neighborhood for 10 or 20 years. This has never happened. And I talked to one of the authors of this new report, and he said, what is at a university in Florida, a researcher, and he said, what is happening on Alton Road is climate change happening in the here and now. And what's interesting about that is it's not killing anyone. It's not devastating. It's wreaking a really big economic cost. Property owners are already experiencing damage. I talked to people who said it's flooding their cars. People who say, I don't want to go to that part of town. These aren't massive and dramatic, but what the scientists are saying is this is just the first taste.
It's hard to argue.
And it's going to get a lot worse. And the amount of money that the city is having to spend to deal with it. They're rebuilding their whole sewage system to be more resilient, to block that water, but it's going to keep coming. And it made a big impression because so many people said, this is it, it's new, it's here, it's now, and the rest of the country is
right in front of our eyes.
Yeah.
Pete, I want to take you back to the Supreme Court. Because usually we don't talk about the cases the court doesn't take. We talk about the decisions and the arguments. But this week they decided not to take a case about guns.
Yes.
And you think there's more to it than that?
Well, I do. It's the third time they've not taken this day. Here's why it's a big deal. So in 2008, the Supreme Court, for the first time in our history, said what the Second Amendment means. And what they said is it means at the very least that you have a right to have a gun in your house for self-defense. That has unleashed all these cases around the country about, okay, what about your gun outside the house? And what these cases have usually taken the form of is, can I have a concealed weapon permit? Can I have a permit to carry a gun on the streets of wherever? Now, this latest case came from New Jersey. You have to have a permit there to carry a gun. They are very reluctant to put them out. This is a state of 7 million, and they have about 1,200 of these permits. This was a man who services and maintains automatic teller machines, carries around heaps of cash, and he wanted a gun, and the state said no. He appealed, and the Supreme Court declined to take the case. The interesting thing is that this has really divided the lower courts. Some say, yes, you can carry a gun. What does the right to keep and bear arms mean if you can't carry it around? Other states have said no. It's limited to the Second Amendment is limited to your house. So it's a hot issue, but People keep knocking on the door, and the Supreme Court isn't taking it.
Yeah, it's kind of a textbook example of conflicted lower courts.
Indeed it is.
The Supreme Court would normally take.
So it leads one to think that, remember, it takes 4 votes to grant a case, but it takes 5 votes to win. So if your side thinks you have the 4 but not the 5, you might be reluctant. And that suggests, and I don't know this, but it just suggests that the 4 conservatives are thinking, we're not sure we have Tony Kennedy, and the 4 liberals are thinking the same thing. And so they don't want to take it unless they have some sense of how it's going to come out.
Fascinating, fascinating. Well, thank you. You're right. It does matter. Thank you, Pete.
Oh, you're very welcome.
For informing.
It's a service.
Thank you all as well. Stay online. Check out everything else we're covering, including my blog this week about the kidnapped Nigerian girls and #activism. And we'll see you on the next Washington Week Webcast Extra.